Hey everybody, what's happening? It's Robert Phoenix. We're here for the Friday FARcast, rocking my Cleveland Indians cap, and proud of it. How is everybody? Thanks for being here. Uh, Holy shit, a Pat Tillman reference. Yes, yes. I was pondering what would make a good thumbnail for today's show, and I was cruising around. You put in a search term on Google. You put in archetypal warrior, Vietnam, and the search results were pretty tepid. And I thought to myself, well, who's an archetypal warrior? It's Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman is an archetypal warrior, right? He went from the NFL, which is sort of the modern gladiatorial pitch, and decided that he wanted to go serve and fight for his country over in the Big Suck. And I think Pat found out pretty quickly that what he signed up for was not what he signed up for. And unfortunately, I think that there was some deadly blowback as a result of him being there. He reminds me a little bit of George Patton in some ways. When Patton was kind of on the back end of World War II and saw what was going on and saw who was really running the show, and all of a sudden he said basically we were fighting against the wrong people. And those are the words that came out of Patton in his letters. And of course, he has that weird accident and then eventually dies in the hospital. Gee, I wonder why. Right. So Tillman reminds me a little bit of Patton in some ways. And he is really an archetypal warrior. And we're going to get into that today. I did this interview with Cherlyn, who has been a client and a friend since 2020, although it seems like longer because it feels like we live in accelerated time. And I've met Cherlyn, I've met her, her family, and so we're 3D, right? And she's very talented, and she has this website, this project called Landnam, and it's all about helping soldiers, warriors, right, and hooking them up with other soldiers and warriors who have run into some heavy problems with the limitations of the vet. She'll talk about all of that, but we also talk about this, archetype of the warrior, because she has a Jungian background, and you'll be surprised by what she has to say in terms of the people that uh, play that role. It breaks some stereotypes. So she's been wanting to come on the show for a while, and we were trying to we couldn't do it last Friday because it was the George Floyd thing. It was but it was the run up to Memorial Day. And normally I am not a big Memorial Day person, only because I feel like a lot of the conflicts that people are suckered into are, corporate conflicts, right? Bankers' wars, and I don't think Cherlyn would disagree with me on that. That said, right, there is this archetype of a warrior, and they have to live this out in some ways, right? They have to live it out in some way, and so it's one of these kind of psychic conundrums that you have this archetype, and then you have the theater of war, which is becoming increasingly transparent about the motivations behind. Like, you could get away with it in World War One and World War Two. Like, there was a lot of kind of blind patriotism that went on during those times. And then there's this real kind of slump, with Vietnam, and it's not cool, right? It's not cool to be a part of a war. But then they fire up the war machine again after 9/11, and they have this, steroidal boost of, faux patriotism. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, and that's where Pat Tilton's story clicks in with all of this. So we talk about that, and it's a really fascinating interview. So let me do this. We'll do a little just recognition. Who's here today? We got my man DJ Mike. He's here. Joe Litke. I was in Ranger Selection 2010. I distinctly remember one day of selection because we had to choose Airborne Ranger in the sky. We dedicated all our push-ups to my NCOIC. So, Joe, you might find this to be a very interesting show from your perspective. Cherlyn, by the way, isn't just somebody who just sits behind a desk. She was deployed in Afghanistan to work on the ground with, what was happening to people in real time. So, she's been there, right? She kind of knows what happens. She's seen it firsthand. So it'll be good. I think you'll enjoy it. Bo is here. Hey, Bo. My man Ryan is here. Dova Haza. If anyone of you chooses Tillman, you'll be smoked twice. The guys in selection said, who's Pat Tillman? The next round of selection changed to, you may choose Tillman if you want. Tillman, Tillman was a badass. He was just a badass. I mean, from his NFL career, he was an undersized safety. I mean, he was maybe if he was lucky, he was 5'10", right? But he flew around the field like a fucking Tasmanian devil. And he was getting ready to have his next big his first big contract, right? His first big contract. And he said, no, thanks. I'm going to enlist. So that's a warrior. Shirley, Lo Shiambo. Hey, Shirley. Harry Bowie. Heya. Aaron L. Hope everyone's having a great. I'm having a great start to my day. Got a lot done so far, and look to have more done as the day progresses. Susie G is here. Hello, Susie G. Carolina in the Pines. Smedley Butler, good old Smedley. War's a racket. Susie G is 52 today. 52. My, oh my. You know what that means, don't you? You know what that means, don't you? Susie gets the birthday song. She gets the birthday song. Right here. This is for... Hold on, birthday guy. Hold on, birthday guy. We got to tee this up. Susie, you get the special rainbow version of birthday guy. Hold on. Cat.
Your birthday.
There you go.
Your birthday. Your birthday. Happy birthday. It is your birthday. It is your birthday. It is your birthday. Happy birthday.
One more.
Your birthday. Your birthday. Your birthday. Happy birthday. It is your birthday. It is your birthday. It is your birthday. Happy birthday.
Oh, that's enough. That's enough. That suits you, Susie. That suits you. Veronica's Barn, just popping in for a little bit of coffee break. All right. Pop away. Lisa Ann White's here. Who else? Curtis Moonflower. CC Jones, the fantastic one. Claire. Hello, Claire. Claire's here. He's tidying about. It was a good morning, Susie G had a little chat with her 84-year-old mom to help resolve some old wounds. That's always good. Mary Grether, hi, Mary. Denise Walker's here. We got a good crew. There she is, Mad Maxine. Lynette Jardine. Did I say hi to Bo? Bo, you get a double hi today if I forgot to mention you. Let's see. Texas caregiver, Brian, my man. Good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. All right. I think we're good. I think we have a decent house. Better than an indecent house. MJ Chenard. Tuning in live, yes, you are. And Green Eyed Crow has now joined us. Kentucky Buck 411 has now joined us. The room is the seats are starting to be filled up here. How about that? I am seriously thinking about doing a pop-up on locals today for about an hour. And if I do it, it'll probably be around 4 p.m. for about an hour. And we'll just get in there and we'll kind of chew the fat on what happened yesterday. So if you guys want to get something out of your system, if you're frustrated, you're pissed, if you're amused, we'll probably have an hour of psychic relief, I think, over on locals. So I think it'll be around 4 p.m. Central Standard for about an hour, just an hour. Want to do a whole bunch, and then really, it's you get to talk. I'll set the space up. You guys just get to talk. Let's see. Tell me what example we're killing the best. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Carolina Pines says, my older brother, twins, were drafted for the Vietnam War. One went underground in a Titan missile solo. The other was a rescue chopper pilot. Both defected in various, neither a warrior archetype. Okay. Sometimes you get sucked up in the machine. Sometimes the vacuum of conflict and war will suck you up. All right, let's get going. This is Cherlyn, Dr. Cherlyn T. Jones, and myself from earlier this week. Enjoy the interview. I'll be back at the end.
It's another edition of the Friday FARcast, even though technically it's not Friday. So we're going to be time traveling into the past and into the future. And, we have such a rich community of people here that listen to and watch the show. And I've met many of you. So it's always a pleasure to bring somebody from the community on to talk about their work. And today I have the great pleasure of interviewing my friend Cherlyn, whom, how long have we known each other now? Maybe like 8 years or something like that?
It seems like 8 because it was COVID. So it's like dog years, right?
Did we start to connect during COVID? Is that right?
2019 was when we first talked. So
Oh,
it was on that cusp right before, but yeah, it's like dog years.
So 5 years,
like 10.
And I have actually met you and your lovely family in person. So, which is always really, really cool. And today we have you on the show because you're in Hawaii doing some really interesting and incredible work for vets. And it's something that it's a big part of your life and what you're dedicated to. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go over to your website and I'm just going to read your bio. And then we're going to take a little cruise your website and we'll go deeper on what you're doing and how you're helping the men and women of this country who have been in some form of either battle or conflict or engagement, deep engagement with service, and finding ways for them to heal and integrate and find themselves once again. So here's Cherlyn's bio. Dr. Cherlyn H.T. Jones holds a BA in anthropology from Rollins College. and a PhD in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. She has done field work on sustainable communities in Bali, Indonesia, New Zealand, Scandinavia, and further social science fieldwork in Afghanistan, Switzerland, and the UK. Previously, she was employed as a Department of the Army civilian DAC at Walter Reed Medical Center as a social scientist deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. During her tenure at inpatient psychiatry at WRAMC, which is the Walter Reed Army Medical Center, which was responsible for the most acute psychiatric cases in the Army that required removal from theater, she helped to stand up the first procedural psychiatric clinic in the military health system. As the clinic coordinator, she performed transcranial magnetic stimulation therapy, TMS, as a non-pharmaceutical treatment for major depressive disorder, and served as a principal investigator on an interdepartmental research project to use TMS experimentally for the treatment of neuropathic pain in upper extremity amputees. In 2011-2012, in Afghanistan, she served in RC South Kandahar province at FOB Spin Boldak on the Pakistan border as the senior social scientist and civilian advisor to the combatant commander, conducting daily outside the wire meetings with local Afghan partners and key leaders. Due to a knee injury during her deployment, she came to further understand the particular challenges facing our warriors and their reintegration into community, combining her experience of and with sustainable communities, building, and agriculture. In 2012, she began developing off-grid homesteads in Montana, continued her volunteer efforts in support of other veteran service organizations, and finally, in 2022, founded Landnam Warrior. Its broad mission endeavors to recreate the sense of well-being and purpose of living close to the land to our veterans and service members in transition to civilian life, thereby assisting their reintegration. That, at the same time, rejuvenates and restores our communities at the most basic level. So there you go. That's a lot. And we're just going to scroll up here, and these are some of your strategic partners. Silvio Bering, the Freemasons. No, I'm just kidding.
It's missing. It's a Team Alpha Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
Somehow words got left out, and the website is still in process. So
okay, Haviland Earth Engineering, and of course, American Veterans and Vets. And so we have a lot of things that you're engaged with here: fire restoration, seedling planting, support of American Eagle pilots, World War II. And there you are in Oahu, which is where you are right now. So how long ago was this picture taken?
that was last summer at a repatriation ceremony. So the Defense POWMIA accounting agency, they're continually working around the world to locate and then repatriate remains of American soldiers. This was actually a repatriation of, I think it was 5 Korean soldiers that had been buried here in Hawaii since the Korean War, and they had just recently identified the remains. And so it was a repatriation back to Korea, which, for reasons of where we are in the world right now, is a big event. So there was a delegation from the Republic of Korea, and it was a very moving ceremony. It was an honor to attend.
And burial services and rites are really big in the Asian community, right? So being able to do something like that, no matter how long after the fact, is something that can be incredibly integrated or for these Korean families. Like a big part of their lives is just missing, not just in terms of the person, but the person, in sort of, geolocation, right? Like, so that's really interesting that that's still going on. And I'm sure it's really valuable. let's get into your mission here. It's to enable the successful reintegration of our warriors, assisting and becoming integral to community renewal and revitalization. Landnam is the Icelandic word mythologist Joseph Campbell often spoke of in relation to creating one's own or new guiding mythology, defined as land taking. It was used to describe the process the first inhabitants, colonists of Iceland, went through to sanctify their discovered homeland with new stories. Warrior denotes that the vector of this action is, for us, our warrior class, service members, and veterans, and their attendant skill set. Through a process of purposeful engagement in their work with each other and on behalf of their communities, our warriors may add their voices to the development of meaningful narratives in service to its revitalization. Okay, so I have a couple questions right off the bat to ask you about your work. But just to reinforce your background, you have a lot of experience and work in the Jungian model, right? So you're working with archetypes, you're working with the collective unconscious, you're working with the shadow, and all these other Jungian ideas that are, I think, really important. Before I ask you about some of the different, I would say, timelines of warriors that you've worked with, what's your experience been like using something like Jung and some Jungian techniques with these service men and women? And what do some of those techniques look like?
Well, I think the majority of it has been not a straightforward sort of, okay, now we're going to do a Jung process. Let's write down your dreams. Let's analyze, the symbols that are important to you in your life. It really hasn't been that. What it has been are the kind of the theoretical or the underpinnings or the practice of Jung, whereby, as he said, the oldest form of healing is enchantment. So bringing somebody into a field that, like for me at the hospital, like bringing them into a setting that among all of those that they would encounter, I would say, in that medical environment was depathologized. So you come in and there's no, there was the equipment of the chair, but there weren't, drugs and syringes, and I didn't have on a white coat. And so it was devoid of this sense of pathology, and it was devoid of this sense of hierarchy. It was about come into the office. Yes, you got this treatment, but we talked the whole time. And I didn't portray myself as an expert. Technically, I wasn't doing clinical talk therapy with them, but that's what they wanted to do. So, we would reimagine their stories together in a setting that was, as I said, it was without hierarchy or an assumed pathology. And I think that's one thing that was central to Jung, was that you already have the key to your cure. Your symptom is the key to your cure. Your symptom isn't an impediment. It's only an impediment insofar as that you deny it or you repress it. If you follow it, we can help find the root of it together. So in as much as I was able, I tried to facilitate that with the folks that I worked with. So that's the short answer, is that exploring the fact that, again, Jung really believed that we held the keys to our own cure. And I tried to encourage that. And the other work in the social science work, what I tried to bring forward were the symbols that were in play in whatever setting we were in, rather than just looking at the immediate, okay, here's what's good, here's what's bad, here's who's on our side, here's who's on the other side. I would listen in for the metaphors that they were using. In Afghanistan in particular, poetry is central to their language. They're always making allusions to poetry. Luckily for me, I love Sufi poetry and I've read quite a bit of it. So whereas somebody else would hear a literal, what the person was saying, I would hear the metaphor from a Rumi poem and go, oh, they're not saying that, they're powerless. They're saying they're going to take action, just as an example. It was things could mean something far different, but I was looking at it symbolically, because that's my training is that code book of symbols, as Joseph Campbell called it. You know, it's like once you got the code book, or once you can literally learn how to read symbols. So that's how I sort of have employed it in those fields.
Yeah. Interesting. I wanted to ask you about the various timelines of service people that you have worked with. I would assume that the number of World War II vets is probably quite low because a lot of them are not around anymore. But have you worked with World War II vets?
Not directly, other than, you know, my grandfather and great uncles were many of them were World War II vets.
Mhm.
And as an interesting historical fact, I actually had two uncles, great uncles, one on my mom's and my dad's side, who were both here at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed.
Oh, wow.
So there's a really interesting family connection there. I'm like, is that some sort of record that you have two
Kind of
family
Jungian in
members?
its own way, in some ways, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That this sort of rhizome, as Jung would call it, is existing below the surface and keeps sort of blossoming out these effects or these products. So yeah, so no, World War II, no, nor Korean. The first my first engagement with military folks was in 2000 directly. In this work was in 2006, and that was in Washington State with the Department of Veterans Affairs for Washington State. And both of the gentlemen that I worked with there, one was I worked more directly with the man that founded Mark. His name is Mark Fisher, and he founded a group called the Veterans Conservation Corps. And the state director's name was Tom Schneider. Tom was a Vietnam veteran, and Mark had been counseling veterans since the Vietnam War. So, and my dad was a Vietnam veteran, but anyway, my first engagement were with people who had worked or were directly Vietnam veterans and had a really interesting historical perspective on that. But most of my engagement has been with ROIF, Iraq and Afghanistan.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I spent a lot of time a few months ago just watching countless Vietnam vet videos on YouTube. And, you know, from guys that were, you know, special forces, and just total badasses to guys that just wound up getting caught up in crazy fire situations. And, a lot of it was really compelling. And after watching all those videos, it really felt to me like those guys got a really raw deal, just in terms of support on the ground in Vietnam in general. They got a totally raw deal. And not only that, but domestically, there's a place I'm going with this, but domestically, there was such an antipathy towards them, with the protest movement and the press. And subsequently, I started to watch a lot of Richard Nixon videos and became I always liked Nixon, but I was blown away by the level of his intellect, and especially when he talked about the war. And one of the things that he said was that the press was clearly against him with the war, and as a result of that, they were able to fuel public opinion. So we never really had a chance in a lot of ways to win that war, because the Vietnamese and whoever was working with them, probably the Russians, maybe the Chinese, right? They all knew that the country was divided. And so all they had to do was just kind of outlast the opposition, and they'd probably win anyway. And for the most part, they were right. I mean, some of the Vietnam vets, especially the ones who were highly decorated, you know, they would come back home and almost to a man, they would start to get harassed at the airport because they would be wearing their uniforms and their medals. And it was something that they really weren't prepared for. And for some of these guys, it was a really difficult transition to have to deal with that kind of hostility. So where I'm going with this is that usually, I would say historically and perhaps even mythically, when men would come home from war, even if they had fought valiantly and lost the war, they were not ridiculed, right? They were generally regarded as, hey, you defended the crown, or you defended the land, or you defended the folk, and there was no, they may have felt shame in that they had lost the war, but it wasn't like they were pilloried. So is there any mythological precedent for soldiers coming home and having that kind of reaction to where they had been, it, laid on them, perpetrated? Do you know anything mythologically or historically where that's happened?
I don't know of that in particular. What I do know is that I've just been actually researching quite a bit into the 14th century. It's very interesting. A lot of the seeds of what we're experiencing right now were laid in that time period when society really started to stratify, and economic divisions happen, and all these developments came in warfare, and the rise of these hierarchies, and the church and the state, and the development of taxation, all these epidemics, all these things, right, were happening. And it really seemed like the end of the world to people. And one thing that happened that you saw there was that what began as an ideal of like knighthood and chivalry became military brigandage. And people really started turning against the warrior class. They started seeing them as just oppressors, in a lot of ways. So I could see that, where it's like, at one point they'd ride into a village or a town and everybody waved banners, and the next thing they know, they're getting stoned because they're like, what are you going to do? Are you going to like raise our village to the ground, or are you here to save us? So maybe there's something there, that could be considered similar. The other thing that I would, not necessarily a parallel, but maybe an absence, is that when you, in so many cultures around the world, what is unprecedented in all of these wars is this idea that a warrior comes straight home from battle. So in indigenous and tribal cultures, up until the rise of big hierarchies and civilizations, and even in some of those, there was a transition period. You didn't get to go from killer back to civilian. There, it wasn't like now you're this, now you're that. There was a liminal space where you had to cleanse or purify or heal or do something.
Right.
So that transition just in itself of like black, white, A, B is in itself traumatic. And there you just saw it cast into really sharp relief, where now you're going to like double trauma it because you've got half or whatever the population against you. So those are the two things I think would be salient to that, like looking at that dynamic.
Yeah, I just really unfortunate what those men had to go through. It was just a lose-lose situation, right? It was a lose-lose in Vietnam, and it was a lose-lose when they got home. And my heart goes out to a lot of them. And I've known a few Vietnam vets, and we used to have Perry Ulander over here on the show every now and then, who wrote a really good book called Walking Point, who passed away last year. So, what about the transition? Because there was a time when soldiers came back from Iraq, Afghanistan. They weren't, given the same kind of social stigma that the soldiers from Vietnam had gone through. What would you think was the change around that? Was it because of 9/11 and the patriotism that was injected into that scenario? Because there is clearly a very different response from people coming from the Middle East versus coming from Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, just a couple more things to your last point. It took me a while growing up to realize, or maybe looking back on growing up to realize the effect of that, two things, the effect of that war on a generation of men that were my generation's fathers, our generation X broadly,
Right.
our
Yeah,
fathers,
boomers,
right?
boomer dads, yeah.
Yeah, whatever side of the conflict they were on, people died. A lot of people died. It's like our dads knew people who died from their high school classes. And I remember my dad driving by. They had a monument. They used to have a monument in downtown Bradenton. Driving by the monument and just bursting into tears. And like these were at his high school in this town. Like 10 or 15 guys had died.
It's a lot.
His best friend had PTSD really bad. I mean, that's when I was a kid. These were real effects. And so I don't think we really, with any of these things, we haven't. I said this to a lady yesterday. I was at a Memorial Day ceremony with. It's like this butcher's bill has like 4 or 5 mortgages on it. It hasn't been paid. We just keep kind of adding the debt and not really ever resolving the trauma or bringing it into consciousness. The other thing is that one thing that's really similar is that right now, and as with that conflict, what began as at the beginning of the war, measured, responsible, intellectual, middle-class people had a difference of opinion about that war. And as soon as and we can talk for days about how this happened or why it happened, but as soon as this anti-war movement became identified with a certain type of music, drug use, this total loss of ethics and morals, and once it became identified with that, then people weren't allowed to have a difference of opinion. You had to pick a lane.
Yeah.
If you were on this side, you chose that. And if you were for the war, and if you did this, you were on that. And no one was allowed. People weren't allowed to have a nuanced, different of opinion. And so I see that now too, where it's like everybody's trying to like force each other into all these lanes where we're not allowed to have nuanced debates about whatever we choose to. But as far as right now goes, and how that transition happened to like not blaming our soldiers, I think that maybe a positive outcome over time was that our generation saw how damaging that was, this process you're describing, and how damaging it was. And it wasn't serving anyone. And as the story started to come out of what people went through, not only that, but then also this idea that the stratification of the draft, right? Like if you were in college, you didn't have to go. Well, what does that do? And then maybe that it made people understand that people were doing what they were told. They were doing what they thought they were supposed to. It wasn't about their own personal mission. So maybe over time, there was a realization that blaming the individual soldier was doing far more harm than good. I don't know, but I think that might be a part of it. I definitely think the 9/11 thing was a big part of it.
9/11 was the rehabbing of the image of the military.
Exactly.
Because we hadn't really had a major conflagration since Vietnam. We dabbled probably in the Balkans, right? And we were there, but we weren't supposed to be there. We were kind of in Angola, but that was mostly the CIA. And we were in Grenada, right? Those were like the major theoretical conflicts in between those wars. They were really nothing in a lot of ways, right? So now we have this major ramp up to a war. It's an indeterminate war at that point, right? Like we're going to go get somebody. We don't know who we're going to go get, but it's all, lathered up, on the, sort of this patriotic steroids. And it gave, and it does kind of rehabilitate this image of the military, right? It's sort of like, we don't care what you do at this point. You're our heroes, and you're going to win back our honor, because theoretically these guys with box cutters destroyed really important parts of our country, and we're not going to question that narrative. And in fact, we're going to support you and celebrate you. Now go get them, right? And that's kind of how it went down. And where were you around 2001 when all this is happening?
I was in Florida. I was in Orlando. I had just finished my undergraduate degree. Or I was done with it. I didn't graduate till, it doesn't matter. I was done. And actually 9/11 is my eldest son, Jesse, whom you've met. It's his birthday. And so yeah,
Great guy, by the way.
I agree. Oh my goodness. So yeah, it was I was there. My older boys were young, and I just it was funny. It was ironic, interesting, crazy, because in my undergraduate degree, I really looked closely at the roots, the cultural roots, symbolic roots of the Vietnam War, and looked at sort of the serial way that the American people were sort of pulled into it and misled in this way, and the cultural factors were ignored, and all these little intricate web of things. And so as soon as it happened, I just knew. I actually had dreams too, but I knew that we were going to war with Iraq. I just knew it before. I mean, like, as soon as it was just,
But that wouldn't happen for another 2 years.
I know.
Right.
I know.
I mean, the first get off is Afghanistan, and they're like, they're fast, right? They're fast. But we knew that Iraq was in the crosshairs. So where were you when the whole 9/11 thing went down? Were you mystified? Where was your political psyche and consciousness at that time?
I could say, I remember, without going down too many rabbit holes, I can say I saw a lot of the inconsistencies because I watched the footage as it happened, as so many of us did, and listened to the reports, and then they changed, and it was like, wait, what?
Right.
So I was, at the time, as you can imagine, after 4 years of anthropology in a liberal arts school, I was off the end of the left of the spectrum, and I'm like, where's the rat? They're going to start a war. I know what they're going to do, and
well, it's when the anti-war movement still had a little bit of
some it did. And I can tell you, my experience was, we immediately started going to protests, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is in Orlando. And at the time, Orange County, Florida was one of the most conservative counties in the United States. I mean, people say it won the election for George Bush, that the disputed the 2000 election.
Right.
So I was supposedly in one of the most conservative counties in the country. And we would go out and protest on, like, the main intersection downtown Orlando. And we would, honk if you support us. And I mean, my memory of it is that there was a huge amount of support. Like, every car was like, supportive. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, people don't want this. They don't want it. But I'm seeing on the news where it says that 75%, and this might be a little bit into it, I'm conflating, like, okay, there's 9/11, but then it went very quickly, as you said, Iraq came into the crosshairs. I'm seeing on the news 75% of Americans support this war. And I'm going, no, they don't. I live in the most conservative one in the United States. I know they don't. So where are they? And it was like this moment of unreality where I was like, it doesn't matter what you say. Nothing you do is going to change this.
Right.
And that was really a tough moment for me to realize, like, you're going to have to just be with this. And as you remember at the time, it was like, you're for us or against us. There was two, again, they tried to do the two camps.
Right.
And that was difficult with, friends and family, and being the mother of sons, I'm thinking draft, right? I'm like, how do I get my kids out of this country? I really had a big episode,
Yeah.
But eventually what that turned into was that I realized that this this symbol, this archetype of the warrior was very important to me and was central to my life, and that I was going to have to negotiate with it. And eventually figured out that I didn't know the first thing about it. I knew how to judge it. I knew how to do all these external things about it, but I didn't know what was motivating these people. I didn't know who they were. And it's still like that. Unless you're in a military family or in the military yourself or very near a base, there's just not that much crossover between the civilian and military populations.
You know, that's one of the themes that came up in a lot of these Vietnam videos, was that, you know, their father had served or their uncle had served. Like there was this familial connection. So a lot of these guys they just signed up. It wasn't even about getting drafted. Like, okay, I'm going to go do this because it's part of my family. It's in my DNA, which I think is really, really interesting. So was that what you found as well? That a lot of this is sort of an inherited trait to some extent?
I think that plays a big part in it. And in fact, in my dissertation, you're in theory, you're supposed to have an open question, right? Or you're supposed to be able to prove yourself wrong if that's what the data provides.
Right.
Most of the time, you obviously want your premise to be right. But one of my embedded questions was about who joins the military. And because of what I had learned about the Vietnam War, I assumed people are tricked into this. People go into the military because they're poor and it's their only way out. And that I found isn't true. That people go into the military because they believe in it. They have a patriotic belief in the mission and they want to fulfill it. There's mostly middle class people that do it, because I was actually really shocked by that, because I thought, oh yeah, that's just people getting hoodwinked and abused and no, that's not true.
So that busted your paradigm.
It did. And there's been a lot of busting of my paradigm over the years. And I think that's, as an aside, I think that's one reason people may resist doing their inner work, is because you have to prepare to be humbled, because you're wrong a lot.
So this is an interesting question. Now, some of it, again, is determined by family history, because like I said, with those videos, it was really clear, right? And they looked up to those guys who were, particularly the World War II guys, because, they won the war, right? They came back home. And if you were in World War II and you came back home, you were the shit, right? Like the greatest generation. And you felt like you were kind of on top of the world. You beat the Japs, you beat the Germans, and this is your time. So I think a lot of that was transference with this younger generation, and they saw that. They saw some of the bravado and the confidence, the sense of purpose, right? Like they knew their place in history, so it made it easier for them to make those decisions. But apart from that, is there a warrior gene that somebody may have a marginal relationship with that kind of lineage, but for whatever reason, they're called to do this? So have you discovered like this warrior gene or this warrior archetype that gets worked out in a certain way?
Well, I think so. I think so. And as much as archetypes predominate all of our lives, in one way or another, people are called to live out certain roles and develop their souls and their characters through those roles. And through my work with our warriors, that's what I've discovered. And it's so interesting to me, this idea that, not idea, but this lived experience of a mission, that you're going to find a mission, if that's in your genes, if that your spiritual genes, the genes of your soul. And to some degree, obviously there can be a physical component of it. But you're going to do it. And you see that. You can look at, so right now, with all the criticisms of the VA and how we treat our veterans and the official response to their, ongoing care, if they need it, is that different veteran service organizations have just proliferated. I mean, they are just thousands and thousands and thousands in every community, you know, veterans. These are veterans serving veterans. These are not.
This is not
going,
the VA. These are people who want to take care of their own.
Exactly. And they are going to find a way to do it, you know, and that's why, you know, one of my goals with my organization is I'm not reinventing the wheel. Every community is coming up with their own answers on the ground in their community of how they want to do this. And if I can find ways to link, we can talk more about the specifics, but I'm just trying to link up resources. So to me, that is what is shown. It's been so inspiring to me that what you're saying is absolutely right, is that this warrior gene archetype will be expressed. It will be expressed. And that's what the kind of the turn I had to make in my academic work in my life was realized, because I thought I was going to like end war, bring down, you know, whoever did it, stop the challenge. For myself, what I discovered, which I think is the truth, is that it's the co-opting of the warrior archetype into all of these channels that aren't serving them, or maybe broadly our communities, or more broadly our country, because the warrior archetype itself is really important and it will be expressed. You know, so if it's suppressed or denied or smothered in some way, it's going to find an outlet. And if we can provide those outlets for our communities that serve them, you know, rather than take away from them and then send back really wounded people internally and externally for the next generation to work out, that's a better solution.
Have you ever encountered someone who served Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever, and they had like a red pill moment or a black pill moment, and then they really questioned why they did what they did? And, said, I was over there for these corporate overlords and I didn't know what to do with myself, or, my action or my time while I was there. Have you ever encountered somebody like that?
Oh, yes.
What's that like for that person? And how do you help them move forward? Because that's such a fundamental breach of trust and faith, in good faith, that I think they could go into a very dark place. So yeah. What's that like, and how do you address something like that with someone?
Well, I think, first of all, this is an old problem, a very old problem. This is what Homer was writing about in the Iliad. This was the source of Achilles' trauma. This is the source of his complete breakdown. And that's what Jonathan Shea wrote about. Jonathan Shea worked at the Boston VA Mental Health Service since working with Vietnam veterans. And he wrote 2 books. I think he may have written more by now, but just 2 books that are real well known are Achilles in Vietnam, Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character. And then his second one was Odysseus in America. And I'm forgetting the subtitle right now. But looking back at the Vietnam War and correlating it to the Iliad, saying, hey, these same things have been happening for a long time. He identified 2 sources that will really metastasize trauma in somebody. One of them is the betrayal of what's right, meaning the moral code, the ethical code of humanity gets violated. A body is desecrated, a child is killed, like these basic sort of like human contract things are done. And the other one is the being betrayed by your command, seeing that your higher command is doing the wrong thing and is not standing up for you. Sorry, that's part of the betrayal of what's right. The other one is losing your bosom friend, losing your boon companion.
Right.
So if you lose somebody that's the closest to you, that it's because they're really closer to you even than your partner or your wife or even your child. It's more like a mother-child relationship than it is a brother.
Yeah, because you're responsible for each other's life.
Yep. Yeah. So there's that, and then there's the betrayal of what's right by. So yes, I've seen that. Yes, it's the most devastating thing. And it's been going on for a very long time.
Right.
But in the realization of that, people realize that because you can't like pluck out the warrior archetype out of your being, which
Right.
what my contention is and what I've written about is that you can expand it and balance it by the shaman archetype. So warrior shaman, you'll find this in cultures all over the world that these archetypes are twins. One does the outside fighting and one does the inside fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the inside fighting is always going to be the harder one. The outside is always only an analog to what the real one that's going to have to be inside. So if they can go across that moment, if they can go through that moment of realization that on whatever level, whether it was an immediate commander or their government or, however it happened to them, that they feel like they were betrayed in some way, they can move through that and then bring that struggle inside and deal with it, then what they become, and they might not articulate it in any way like this, but I'm just saying, I'm describing what I've observed. These are the people who found the veteran service organizations. They're the people who end up helping their communities.
Got it.
They turn that into something that's healing, and that's a really shamanic move in how I define it.
Right. So instead of setting up an IED at Goldman Sachs, they help people. Right.
Exactly. So
There's a dark part of me that's still pulling for the wing that will actually do. I'm sorry. I'm being a little dark here. But no, that's good, right? They're able to actually transform some very deep pain into something that's quite helpful and of service to others. That's tremendous. So I know you're kind of in the incubator with these guys when they do that. How do they come about that change? How does I'm sure it's different for everybody, but how does that light go off? When does it go? When do you see them turn that corner and say, okay, this is going to be my purpose now. I'm reclaiming part of my life because I'm going to help these other guys. Are you witness to that, or is that something that just kind of happens over time and you get an email one day and they say, hey, look, I've decided I want to do this?
Well, personally, I've observed it in friends, and that's developing. They're deciding what they're going to do with their new knowledge. For the most part, what it's been is my experience of meeting people who are now engaged in the work. Right? They're now. I don't know exactly when they had their moment. I'm not sure of the date. I just know.
Well, we had a little bit of an issue there. I'm not sure why. We had a little bit of an issue there. I'm not sure why, but we're going to restart this. So I apologize for the interruption, and we'll get right back on track. Give me 1 second. Let's hope we can.
Well, here we.
Not sure where I am in the video. Let's see. We're talking about the shaman. Hold on, let's see if I can find this.
No, that's not true.
So that busted your paradigm.
It did.
All right, we're up to
What's that
that.
like, and how do you address something like that with someone?
Well, I think, first of all, this is an old problem, a very old problem. This is what Homer was writing about in the Iliad. This was the source of Achilles.
Okay, because I think this is a really good part. I'm just going to restart it from this point in the video. Again, my apologies. New computers arriving in a few days.
Achilles trauma. This is the source of his complete breakdown. And that's what Jonathan Shea wrote about. Jonathan Shea worked at the Boston VA mental health service since the Vietnam, working with Vietnam veterans. And he wrote 2 books. I think he may have written more by now, but just 2 books that are real well known are Achilles in Vietnam, Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character. And then his second one was Odysseus in America. And I'm forgetting the subtitle right now. But looking back at the Vietnam War and correlating it to the Iliad, saying, hey, these same things have been happening for a long time. He identified 2 sources that will really metastasize trauma in somebody. One of them is the betrayal of what's right, meaning the moral code, the ethical code of humanity gets violated. A body is desecrated, a child is killed. Like these basic sort of like human contract things are done. And the other one is the being betrayed by your command. Seeing that your higher command is doing the wrong thing and is not standing up for you. Sorry, that's part of the betrayal of what's right. The other one is losing your bosom friend, losing your boon companion.
Right.
So if you lose somebody that's the closest to you, that it's because they're really closer to you even than your partner or your wife or even your child. It's more like a mother-child relationship than it is a brother.
Yeah, because you're responsible for each other's life.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then there's the betrayal of what's right by. So yes, I've seen that. Yes, it's the most devastating thing. And it's been going on for a very long time.
Right.
But in the realization of that, people realize that because you can't like pluck out the warrior archetype out of your being.
Right.
What my contention is and what I've written about is that you can expand it and balance it by the shaman archetype. So warrior shaman, you'll find this in cultures all over the world that these archetypes are twins. One does the outside fighting and one does the inside fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the inside fighting is always going to be the harder one. The outside is always and only an analog to what the real one that's going to have to be inside. So if they can go across that moment, if they can go through that moment of realization that on whatever level, whether it was an immediate commander or their government or, however it happened to them, that they feel like they were betrayed in some way, they can move through that and then bring that struggle inside and deal with it. Then what they become, and they might not articulate it in any way like this, but I'm just saying, I'm describing what I've observed. These are the people who found the veteran service organizations. They're the people who end up helping their communities. They turn that into something that's healing. And that's a really shamanic move in how I define it.
Right. So instead of setting up an IED at Goldman Sachs, they help people. Right.
Exactly. So
there's a dark part of me that's still pulling for the wing that will actually do. I'm sorry, I'm being a little dark here, but no, that's good, right? They're able to actually transform some very deep pain into something that's quite helpful and of service to others. That's tremendous. So I know you're kind of in the incubator with these guys. When they do that, how do they come about that change? How does I'm sure it's different for everybody, but how does that light go off? When does it go? When do you see them turn that corner and say, okay, this is going to be my purpose now. I'm reclaiming part of my life because I'm going to help these other guys. Are you witness to that, or is that something that just kind of happens over time and you get an email one day and they say, hey, look, I've decided I want to do this?
Well, personally, I've observed it in friends, and that's developing. They're deciding what they're going to do with their new knowledge. For the most part, what it's been is my experience of meeting people who are now engaged in the work. Right? They're now. I don't know exactly when they had their moment. I'm not sure of the date. I just know that they did it. They made
Right.
the transition into doing this work, and no matter how painful the betrayal was or the trauma was, what they're doing now is more important. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, but this matters more. And
Right.
that's, to me, what we've got to tap into. We've got to give our warriors a mission that is more important or as important as whatever came before. And there's no shortage of missions. Look
Yeah.
around. And right now, my nonprofit is focused on food. Like, okay, I did last year I went on a 6-week long research trip. I started in Hawaii, Southern California, Texas, Florida, talking to partners, people I knew, and trying to identify, like, how can we best serve. So there's a program by which every service member in all branches can do a paid internship at the end of their time of service. It's varying lengths, but most can do at least 4 months. They're paid, that their insurance is paid, their workers' comp is paid. Like, it's an incredible opportunity for them and for potential employers, but very few service members take advantage of it, and very few employers even know about it. And to me, I'm just looking at this going, oh my gosh, there's this amazing resource that we can get into our communities and start giving them a new mission. Anyhow, traveled, talked to people, and with my background and working in like sustainable building and agriculture, I'm focused on those issues of sustainability anyway. But everywhere I went, like the food networks are really precarious.
Yeah.
Our local food systems are in big trouble. Some places they're more robust than others. There's some really interesting stuff going on in lots of communities. Southern California is one of them that can really provide models of how we do this. But on a macro level, it's not good. And I thought, if we can get our warriors working on establishing robust local food networks. First of all, food security is the number one type of security for every living being. If you don't eat, there, nothing else even matters.
Yep.
So that was that's one way I think we can convert this sense of you're going to get engaged in the most important mission in every community, and that's what our pilot projects are focused on.
Yeah. Cool. That's good. So that's a big part of what you do, linking people up with opportunities and opportunities that they're not even aware of, and helping them get a foothold in a new life so that they can contribute and continue to grow as humans. That's great. Let's go back in time a little. The first time you wind up in the Middle East, would you go to Afghanistan? Is that where you went? What was that like for you to show up there and, sort of find yourself in that environment?
It was really interesting. I had done field work in the past in places I had never been, and foreign cultures where I didn't speak the language. And so I had that under my belt, and I had been working with military folks at that point for 5 years. So I was comfortable in that culture. So you have to keep in mind, when I first started working with the military, volunteering and whatnot, I had no experience with them whatsoever. I had to learn from scratch a completely different culture that was not, I wasn't native to it in any way. So over time I had, I felt comfortable around, even though I still wasn't native to it, I was always a total outlier. I knew how to speak their language, and say, okay, here's how I can communicate with them. So I was comfortable with those two things. And because I had done my time at Walter Reed first, I'd like to say, I had seen the unglamorous side of war already. I wasn't fresh faced, ooh, this is going to be so much fun, and a lot of folks that I had been through training with in that same program, who were anthropologists or social scientists who hadn't been in that setting. I think a lot of them, I don't want to, cast judgment, but I didn't have any illusions, as far as I knew how this could end for a lot of people. So that was a benefit to me, that I think I had a sense of reality about it. That being said, it was a completely, totally different world. It was like, I say Kandahar airfield was like a scene out of a zombie movie. It was like an apocalypse. It was this huge, massive city with just those HESCO containers and I think that's what they're called. They fill them with sand and vehicles and people of every nationality, the third party nationals that, basically run all of the, functioning the food and the construction and whatnot. And it was just like really wild. And then our FOB means forward operating base. Our FOB was down on the Pakistan border, which was way far away from any sort of civilization. It was quite a trek. Well, I mean, it was 2 hours, which now that I live in Montana, I'm like, that's nothing.
Right. Yeah.
But it was a ways away. It was just, out in the desert. So it was pretty wild, but I found that I resonated with that place. Afghanistan is a really magical place. And people say that about it. They fall in love with it. There's some history there, that some power node in the earth. There's a reason why it gets crisped and crossed and talked about and fought over so much. And
there is something there, right? Like, why are these countries always trying to get their hooks in Afghanistan, which is, in terms of terrain, one of the most hostile terrains in the world? I mean, it is really a very difficult place to navigate.
The more you read about it, the more you for me anyway, is so captivating. And as I said, being like a lover of Sufi poetry and the philosophy of Sufism in general, I really resonated with me. And then I found out years later, I had my DNA done, and on the matriline side, and in my haplogroup K, they would show you like people that they've tested that are in your group and in like close to you in time.
Yep.
And there was Pashtun in there. And I was like, what? So it's interesting. Blood calls to blood. I mean, it wasn't like when I was there, like, it wasn't like a nice environment. It wasn't like it was fun. It wasn't, but I really loved it. There was something about it that really resonated with me. So, that was, I definitely would like to go back. You can go to some of the surrounding countries still pretty reasonably safe, but
did you have to wear a hijab?
No.
Have you ever tried one on to see what it'd feel like?
No. I probably could have made my life a little easier we, as civilians, in theory, what I was supposed to be doing was working with a team of people,
right,
that would go and do social science research and then report to the commander. In practice, what happened was that my commander basically pulled me off of that and asked me to just come with him and be, so do like a real-time sort of feedback for key leader engagements and whatnot, security meetings and what have you. And so I wore a uniform like the other people. It denoted I was a civilian, but we had to wear all the get up and we were outside the wire. I would say most days, I say daily. It was most days that we were out. So yeah, it was a really interesting and unique experience to have, and to realize that your decisions had importance, or could have some dangerous effects for other people. That was hard. And that was the criticism of that program by academia, was that, oh, this is an intel program. You're just using academics to do intel work. And I mean, to some extent, I guess that's true, and
whether it's direct or indirect, they're going to scrape data from your interactions or notes or whatever, right? I mean, that's
right.
Yeah.
That being said, I had an open question. Can you apply critical thinking, symbolic thinking to conflict environments? To me, the answer was yes and no. Yes, you can, depending on whether or not you have a commander and a command and a command and a command that's going to listen to that.
Right.
And what are the goals here? Are we actually trying to resolve this and leave? Are we, you know, and I'm not the one making those decisions. So yes, you can create conditions and you can bring feedback to a commander that will help him save lives and will help save the lives of the civilians in the community by just not making stupid mistakes, by not making people angry, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Because it became a truism, not became, it since T.E. Lawrence outlined it and then David Kilcullen refined it, you know, T.E. Lawrence had the 27 articles and David Kilcullen wrote them as the 28 articles. But this whole counterinsurgency theory is that if you kill one insurgent, you create exponentially more.
Right.
Like you don't want to kill people because you're just creating a bigger problem. And that at one point that was, I believe it was widely understood, at least intellectually, by a lot of commanders. So I think that was one of the premises upon which we were operating, was that how do we stay away from that so that we don't just create a deeper mess than we're in? One of the biggest challenges was that we didn't have a 21-year war, 21-year war. We had 21-year wars.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because the units would cycle in and out every year, and the organizational knowledge was lost. And like all the reports I did and whatever my colleagues did, they're just gone.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't, and we could
So
speculate about why
there's no continuity. There's no
continuity.
ability to build on other people's work.
Right.
There's no ability to pass down, transfer information to the next group, and so that you actually have a body of work and a body of knowledge that over a period of time you can build something out of. That would have to be really frustrating.
In theory, there was supposed to be, but in practice, it just didn't happen from what I was seeing. And I know it didn't happen after I left because I stayed in touch with the people.
Was that a byproduct of policy, or was that a byproduct of people just not putting it at a certain level of importance in terms of all of this?
My observation was that the program, I don't know by whom, and I don't know who made these, you know, how they made these decisions, but that the program was just sort of designed to fail. You know, it was almost inoperable. The leadership of it within that little corner of the military, the leadership was horrible, and the way to access the data was useless, and the operation of the teams, you know, was completely different depending on the commander. So you talk to one commander and they'd be like, I love this program, this is amazing, bring me more. And the next commander would be like, if you ever bring those people on my base again, I will quit. Like, no, never bring, you know, depending on both the commanders, you know, how they thought, but also how these teams behaved. So again, you'd have people like, well, who were in my role, not like me, but who were in my role, who had lived their whole lives in academia, who get over there and it's just like the Wild West to them, and they behaved badly and they caused a lot of problems. And so it was just really sad.
What would their behavior be like? Were they trying to sort of impose a certain standard on the situation? Did they get infected by some kind of war bug? How did they behave badly?
Well, without naming names or going into too much detail, I mean, you know, they would be acting like badly behaving civilians, drinking, having sex with people, you know, like you just can't do that. You can't do it, you know, and it would cause major personnel problems within a unit. Like this, we're not on a college campus here. People are dying out there. You can't act like that. And it became really, it just, the program got a very bad name. because of some people, you know, and their actions. Between the actions on the ground and then the leadership challenges, it was just ugly, you know. It was very sad. I actually rewrote a whole sort of template of how I thought it could work, right? For one of the generals that had advocated and testified for the program to get passed in front of Congress. Because he asked me, he said, "How's it going?" We had a mutual friend in the Australian Defense Force, and I'd seen him at Christmas, and then I saw him again up in Kandahar, and he said, "How's it going?" And I was like, "Do you want to know?" He always like, to me, I always like ride this line between being respectful and like, why am I even here? Like, I'm not here just to like tell them what they want to know. And what are they gonna do? Fire me? They can fire me. But so I would ask a real question. I would say, do you really want to know? And he said, "Yeah, I want to know." And I was like, "Okay, how much time do you have?" And he's like, "All right, let's do an hour." Or, you know, I don't remember what he said, but he's like, "Come in, shut the door," you know, and made everybody else wait outside. And I was like, it's a terrible mess. It is a terrible mess. You know, if you put your name on it, you should know. And here's why. Here's, you know, this is just my opinion. And he's like, "Well, you know, how about you write it all down and you tell me what you would do different, and then we'll meet next week on a whatever the equivalent at the time was on Zoom and the inter-military, whatever."
Right.
So we did, and I just wrote out a whole new, here's how I would do it from start to finish. And you know, that it's not his fault, but it was never done. But yeah, it's like, and it was after I came back, you know, I went on leave and I came back. I was injured in was really kind of a silly accident. But it wasn't until after I got back that I like, okay, I devoted my time to, you know, the medical side of the military. I've deployed, I've answered my own question. I am not changing this thing from within. That is not happening. So
right. So you ran into the institutional road log, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm glad that I did, because I really did. For me, that question is answered, right? Like, I don't have to sit around wondering like, oh, maybe I could have done this or that.
Right. So
now that's what I'm hearing from friends who have been in for a very long time and feeling like, I always thought I would get a seat at the table. I really believed it. I never did, you know? So
maybe
that
it's
helped
just
me figure out.
maybe it's just the wrong table. That's all. So
Maybe.
is war and danger kind of an aphrodisiac? Because I was remembering like what happened to Laura Logan when she was over there, right? So she was this correspondent, she's married, and then she eventually hooks up with this guy who's involved in psychological operations in Afghanistan, right? And all of a sudden they have this torrid affair. He's married, she's married, they leave their spouses. They're together now, by the way. So and so when you brought that up, it reminded me of that. So my thought is like, war and danger an aphrodisiac?
I think absolutely it is, because it's just that when death is ever present, you know.
Yeah.
I was actually reading about this in this book on the 14th century, about after the plague, that people just became like amoral, right? And they ended up getting married. They're like, marriage just went off the chart. Everybody was just getting married. Everybody's shacking up. Everybody's having sex. They're having babies. They're like, you know, hey, we're alive. So absolutely, I think that it is. And then there's these hyper masculine, sort of aggressive, you know, testosterone fueled thing going on. Absolutely. And it's interesting too, because the people that founded the program I was a part of, the Human Terrain System, is the same story. Montgomery McFate and Steve Fondacaro. They had an affair outside their marriages. I don't know if they're still together, but two
dudes.
No. Montgomery McFate. She's a female.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So not uncommon, I think, right? Because there is something to that sense of omnipresent danger and living on the edge, and it could end at any time, right? And you're in this kind of exotic environment. Yeah. Next thing you know, it's like the villages in Florida. So
Sort of, yeah.
sort of, yeah. All right. Give us a success story that you have experienced through your work that you can be at the end of the day really proud of what happened to a particular individual. You don't have to tell their name or anything, but give us a success story.
Well, I think, it's interestingly enough, uh, it was a lady who was a military spouse, and it was through this program. I mean, so there's a couple there, but one is through this program that we were doing at Walter Reed, the transcranial magnetic stimulation, and she was really debilitated by her depression, really not able to function. And through the course of her treatment and um, I would like to think I had a little bit to do with it. That it really turned around. It really turned around. Like it really eradicated that dynamic from her life. And it was so interesting because after the first 2 weeks, she's like, this isn't working. This is just not working. But she was dressing nicer. She was wearing makeup. Like she just looked different. She looked different. And she's telling, this isn't working. But she's smiling. And I'm like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of that 6 weeks, there was somebody who was very different, a very different individual that could then go back to her job. She's a super smart lady, running her own company, doing all of these things. So that would be sort of an individual level success story. I would say that a more like community success story, or, as I said, these veteran service organizations are proliferating. I mean, on a daily basis, there are more of them coming online. And every community I go to, for me, the success story right now is that I haven't walked into one VSO or agriculture organization or any of the potential partners that we were going to have for our first 5 pilot projects and not met a fantastically enthusiastic response. I mean, I've had my own business for years. I've done sales, like you've done sales. Like it's like, 1 in 10, you don't really know what you're going to get when you walk in brand new to a place. So for me right now, the success story is to be in the zeitgeist. Like this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little part of it, but I'm telling you, people are so excited to be a part of it. They want it to happen. They get it. You read all of those things on my bio and the mission statement and whatever. I don't need to get 2 sentences out of my mouth and people are like, how can we help? Let's do it. And I'm just like, is this really happening? This is amazing. So
would you consider yourself more of like an ambassador at this point, or an ambassador practitioner? Kind of where are you on that spectrum?
Yeah, I think that would be a very good way to describe it, ambassador, cheerleader in chief, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Getting folks inspired to do this. Again, they're already inspired, but providing them okay, you're inspired. Here's this resource. You take this resource and you're going to put these things together and you all are going to make this happen. Because that was what always kept me from really wanting to go deeply into clinical work. I don't want to tell people what to do. I want them to do it. I want them to bring it forward for themselves, or kept me from taking a leadership role of organizationally, I'm this person, tell that. And I don't want to do that. I love watching people bring forth gifts. And that's what is just integral to this program is people bringing forth their own gifts. As T.E. Lawrence said, he's talking about working with the Arabs, but he's like, better that the Arabs do it tolerably than you do it well. Like people need to do it in their own communities and figure out exactly how that looks for them.
Right.
Because one of our challenges is that we've got leadership thousands of miles away making decisions for us that aren't relevant for our own lives.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the magnetic transcranial sacral technique. What is that all about?
So, transcranial magnetic stimulation,
Transcranial magnetic stimulation.
EMS.
Okay.
So if anybody's ever had an MRI, it's the same technology. And that tap, 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 like that noise that MRI makes, it's the same, does that same thing. There are new forms of it now. There's one I was using was a machine called Neurostar. The one now that's more advanced than that is called Brains Wave, where it's the whole, it covers the whole head. The one I was using, and that is still in use, the most common, it's utilized on a certain portion of the left prefrontal cortex. So basically in folks that have what we call major depressive disorder, their left prefrontal cortex is off. It looks like it's off. If you do an EKG, EEG, one of those is a heart attack. I'm really not
dark or something, or
it's like the brain is just not firing,
right.
you know?
So this is a way to re-stimulate
it turns it back on. It's the Faraday principle. You send a magnetic impulse and it converts into electrical impulse.
Okay.
And because of the way that the motor cortex, so the way you find the exact position is by finding where on the motor cortex it will cause their thumb to twitch. And your motor cortex, it's like your hands are here, and then it goes further into your body. This is like your torso, and then your legs and your lower extremities are down deep in your head. So we knew we could use it for major depressive disorder because you could target this part of the brain. And we started using it. You can turn things on and off in the brain, right?
Yeah.
Electrically.
Yeah.
So one of the things they would do is people had aphasia, you can't talk. They would stimulate the speech part.
Yeah.
And the stroke patient or whomever would go, well, I still can't talk. They'd say it out loud.
Oh, wow.
I'm not able to talk. You know,
Right.
they didn't realize they
wild.
were talking.
Yeah.
So you can do that. But
Yeah.
with the machine that I had back then, we could only get to the upper extremities. So that's why we were using it with the neuropathic pain, because amputees they would just basically prescribe them way over the recommended dosage of opioids when they would have amputations, but it never touched the neuropathic pain. So we could basically turn that part off of the brain so that it would stop that. And now with the Brains Wave, they can penetrate they would only penetrate it like an inch into the brain. But with the Brains Wave, they can get all the way down into the bottom. There's a film I would recommend everybody watch. It's called Quiet Explosions, Healing the Brain.
Mm-hmm.
And this film came out 3 years ago. But it's about these different techniques that they've found will heal and treat traumatic brain injury. And TMS is one of them.
Oh, cool.
So a combination of transcranial, the TMS, hyperbaric oxygen, and hormone therapy is revolutionizing the treatment.
Yeah, I've heard the
TMS.
hyperbaric stuff is tremendous.
Yeah.
Really, and worth every cent if you can afford it. People have had some just remarkable recoveries from the hyperbaric stuff. Well, let's give them another peek at your website, shall we? If people want to get involved and find out more about what you're doing, you've got Northern California, Southern California, the Gulf Coast, the Space Coast, and right now you're in Hawaii, and so you're kind of all over the place. But people can keep track of you here, and if they want to connect with you, these are all good places, right here. Yep.
Absolutely. I'm still working on populating the social media. I'm not a natural social media animal, but you can always email me, and I'm working on getting things there for folks to follow what we're doing. But the website should be up to date. So.
All right. Well, Cherlyn, this has been great. In fact, I knew we'd have a good interview because I know you're really smart and you and I connect anyway, but this has been a really good interview, and really appreciate you sharing your experience.
So honored because I know that, because I'm often in or 15 minutes or on the chats or listening in. So I know that the audience here are some really, really deep folks that are able to think critically and care a lot about the world they're living in. So I'm just so honored to have the opportunity, Robert. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And, it worked out really well. You're welcome. And it worked out really well because, we just came out of Memorial Day, right? And I think that this is a reasonable way to celebrate Memorial Day, right?
Absolutely. And if I can just add one little story here. Yesterday at the mayor's Memorial Day ceremony, which was here at the National Cemetery of the Pacific, what they call Punch Bowl in Hawaii. So it's veterans, thousands and thousands of veterans, mostly from World War II and the Korean War. And the keynote speech was given by the current commander of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Stephen Kaler. And who he chose to highlight was a man named Admiral Gordon Chung Soon. And he was the first Asian Pacific person of Asian Pacific descent to become an admiral. And I think to receive the Medal of Honor, if I'm not mistaken. But he told a story about him. Two things about his story are really instructive to what I care about and what I'm doing. One is that he said, when he was in the Pacific and World War II under attack, he was the first Asian American to graduate from the Naval Academy. Anyhow, in the Pacific, his vessel was under attack. He was ordered to abandon it by his superiors. He refused, so he could defend it and continue trying to save lives of the crew members on board. And the next day, when they had the burials of those who were killed, he was able to save the vessel. The next day, when they who had been killed, one of his men said he was the only man brave enough not to duck, and he was the only man with the heart enough to cry. And I thought, isn't that a beautiful, way to sum up the warrior and the shaman? Like when you've got that depth and you can do both of those things. And then the other thing about him was that after he came home and after he retired from the military, he ended up becoming the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
So there was that link with the food, and I was able to say thank you to the Admiral for bringing that up. I was like, that just was so inspiring to me for both of those reasons. So it was a perfect time for us to talk about this. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, continued success to you, Dr. Jones, and I'll see you offline.
Thank you.
Oh, hey. All right. So Dr. Cherlyn T. Jones. And it was a good interview. I've known Cherlyn. Oh shit, hold on. All right, we got to double fuck up. I've known Cherlyn for a while, and we talk, right? Like we talk and we text and I met her kids, and they're great kids. And I knew she would be a really good person to interview on this subject. And it just goes to show how many people who are a part of this community are switched on and are doing things that give back, that are healthy, that are healing. I think it was 3 weeks ago we had Christine on from Pure Soap Flakes, and her kind of entrepreneurial spirit and putting together these natural products so people can use them and not have to deal with all the processing, the chemicals, and all the things that go along with cleaning your body and your clothes. And I know there's more of you out there. And over time, we'll put you on the stage, and we'll give you your 15 minutes of flame or fame, for that matter. So again, thanks to Cherlyn. Go check out her website if you want to learn more about her work, or if you know a veteran that would like to get involved or could use some of the connections and services that she could link them up with. It's a good resource. Tomorrow, we're going to have the next edition of Astro Dads. That's going to happen tomorrow. And I'm not sure what time. Probably in the morning. I'm thinking probably around 11 a.m. That's what I'm thinking. 11 a.m. And Ferris and I recorded that 2 days ago. It's all about Gemini, having a Gemini kid, being a parent of a Gemini kid, being a parent of in a family that has siblings, which is where we encounter Gemini. And if you have any interest in that kind of material, or in Gemini in general, because there's a lot of Gemini talk, come check us out tomorrow at 11 a.m. And again, it's a pre-recorded show, and it'll be part of the library here, so you can always go back and listen to it. And if I can get some work done here, we'll do a little pop-up over on Locals at about 4 p.m. and just for about an hour, so that if you guys want to vent or laugh or whatever you want to do, we'll toss the Trump thing out there, and we'll just kind of have a kind of an open mic session. And I've got a lot of things to say about it, and I have nothing to say about it, which is a weird place to be. Like, part of me is like, so over it. Just so over all of it. I'm over the circus, and it's just a big fucking circus. So I'm just kind of over it. And then another part of me sees it as a raw and naked miscarriage of justice, which, if not overturned, sets precedent for things moving forward. Now, there are people that are in the pro-Trump camp who are the most, how do I say this, hyper optimistic group of people I've ever met in my life, which may not necessarily be a bad thing. But their claim is that it sets precedent to go after the other assholes who have been president of the United States. Maybe. Certainly there's a precedent there. Which way the precedent lands, I guess we'll eventually find out. But I think we'll do a pop-up, and it'll be about 4 o'clock. So if you're interested in joining, all you Locals folks, you'll get a message. I'll post there, and we'll go from there. All right, Astro Dad tomorrow. And that's it. Thanks for being here. As always, Chat Tori, you're the best. Take care. God bless, and bye for now.